The blizzard hit without warning on that January afternoon in 1882, turning the Montana Territory into a white hell that swallowed everything in its path. Molly Kane had been traveling alone on the stage road between Fort Benton and Hamilton when the driver lost control. The horses panicked, and the coach went careening off the frozen path before splintering against a stand of pines. She remembered the screaming, the crack of wood, the driver's body thrown 20 feet into a snowbank where he lay twisted and still. Then she was running, stumbling through knee-deep drifts with nothing but her traveling dress and thin coat, her carpet bag lost somewhere in the wreckage, running because stopping meant dying, and she was only 22 years old with too much life left to give up now. The cold was a living thing, clawing through her clothes, stealing the feeling from her fingers and toes, making every breath a knife in her lungs. Molly had no idea which direction she was going. The snow fell so thick she could barely see her own hands. Her dark hair came loose from its pins and whipped around her face, already crusted with ice. She fell twice, 3 times, pushed herself up because lying down meant never getting up again. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her ears burned with cold that would soon turn to the dangerous numbness of frostbite. She thought about her sister waiting for her in Hamilton, about the teaching position she was supposed to start next week, about all the things she had wanted to do with her life. She thought about dying alone in the snow and how they might not find her body until spring. The thoughts came slower now, her mind beginning to fog as hypothermia crept through her blood. When she fell the 4th time, she could not remember how to stand. The snow felt almost warm now, which some distant part of her mind recognized as a very bad sign. She curled onto her side, tucking her frozen hands under her arms, and watched the snow fall. Beautiful, really, like a curtain of lace against the darkening sky. The shape that appeared through the white was so unexpected she thought she was hallucinating. A man on horseback, hunched against the storm, leading a pack mule behind him. He was there, and then he was closer, and then he was swinging down from the saddle, running toward her through the drifts. "Jesus Christ," he said, dropping to his knees beside her. His voice was rough, urgent. "Madam, can you hear me?" Molly tried to answer, but her jaw would not work properly. She managed a small sound, barely more than a whimper. The man did not waste time with more questions. He pulled off his heavy sheepskin coat and wrapped it around her, then lifted her like she weighed nothing at all. Even through her dulled senses, Molly could feel the strength in his arms, the solid warmth of his chest as he carried her to his horse. He settled into the saddle with her cradled against him, pulling his coat tighter around them both. "Hold on," he said against her hair. "There's a line shack about a mile east. I'll get you warm. I promise I'll get you warm." Molly wanted to tell him thank you, wanted to ask his name, but consciousness was slipping away like water through her frozen fingers. She felt the horse moving beneath them, felt the man's arms secure around her, and then felt nothing at all. She woke to warmth and pain. The warmth was a blessing, the pain less so, but together they meant she was alive. Her fingers and toes burned as feeling returned to them. Her skin felt raw, her throat parched. She was lying on a narrow bunk under several rough blankets, and a fire crackled in a small stone fireplace across the room. The line shack was tiny, maybe 12 feet square, with chinked log walls and a single frosted window. Supplies lined rough shelves, and a man sat in a chair he had pulled close to her bunk, watching her with concerned gray eyes. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark blonde hair that needed cutting and several days of beard stubble on his strong jaw. His face was weathered from outdoor work, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. He wore a faded blue shirt and canvas pants, and his hands, clasped between his knees, were large and scarred from hard labor. "You're awake," he said, and there was genuine relief in his voice. "How do you feel?" "Cold," Molly managed, though it came out as barely a whisper. "And hot, and everything hurts." "That's good. The hurting means nothing got froze too bad." He reached for a tin cup on the floor beside the chair. "Can you drink some water?" She nodded, and he helped her sit up enough to take small sips. The water was cold and perfect, soothing her raw throat. When she had drunk enough, he eased her back down and pulled the blankets up to her chin. "I'm Fletcher Zimmerman," he said. "I run cattle for the 3-Bar Ranch. Was checking the line shacks when the storm hit, making sure they were all stocked. Lucky I was, or I never would have found you." "Molly Kane," she said. "The stage crashed. The driver, I think he's dead." Fletcher's expression turned grim. "Where?" "I don't know. I ran. I don't know which direction." Tears burned in her eyes, partly from exhaustion and pain, partly from the horror of it all. "I just ran." "Don't cry," he said gently. "You did right. You stayed alive. When the storm clears, I'll go look for the wreck, see if there's anything to be done for the driver. But right now you need to rest and get warm. That's all that matters." "I was going to Hamilton," Molly said. "My sister is there. Ellen Kershaw. She'll be worried." "Hamilton is a good 20 miles from here, and with this storm, we won't be going anywhere for at least a couple days." Fletcher stood and moved to the fireplace, where a small pot hung over the flames. "I've got some soup heating. You need to eat something, get your strength back." Molly watched him stir the pot, his movements economical and sure. Everything about him spoke of competence, of a man who knew how to take care of himself and others in this harsh land. She owed him her life, this stranger who had appeared out of the blizzard like an answer to a prayer she had not had time to speak. "Thank you," she said, "for saving me. I would have died out there." Fletcher glanced back at her, and for the first time she saw a hint of a smile. "Would have been a damned shame. Pretty woman like you freezing to death in the snow." Despite everything, Molly felt herself blush. It was not exactly proper, being alone with a strange man in a tiny cabin, but propriety seemed less important when that man had saved your life. Besides, she had a feeling Fletcher Zimmerman was the kind of man who could be trusted, though she could not say exactly why she felt that way. Something in his eyes, maybe, or the gentleness in his rough hands when he had helped her drink. The soup was thin but hot, made from salt pork and dried beans and wild onions, and it was the best thing Molly had ever tasted. Fletcher sat in his chair and watched her eat, making sure she took small, slow bites that would not make her sick. Outside, the wind howled and snow hissed against the window. The little shack was an island of warmth and safety in an ocean of cold and death. "What were you doing traveling alone?" Fletcher asked after a while. "No offense, but that's mighty dangerous, especially this time of year." "I'm a teacher," Molly said. "Or I'm supposed to be. I was hired to teach at the school in Hamilton. My sister's husband manages the general store there. They said they would meet me when the stage arrived." She looked down at her hands, still red and raw from the cold. "They'll think I'm dead when the stage doesn't come." "Soon as the weather breaks, we'll get word to them," Fletcher promised. "Hamilton is not that far. There's ranches between here and there. We can pass a message along." "What about your ranch? Won't they be worried about you?" Fletcher shrugged. "They know I can take care of myself. I've weathered worse storms than this. And the line shacks are stocked for exactly this reason. We've got food, water from melted snow, firewood. We'll be fine for as long as we need to be." The way he said, "We made something warm bloom in Molly's chest that had nothing to do with the fire or the soup." She studied him as he stood to add more wood to the flames, noting the easy strength in his movements, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his hair caught the firelight and turned it gold. He was handsome, she realized, in a rugged, unpolished way. Nothing like the soft-handed town men she had known back in St. Louis, but somehow that made him more attractive, not less. "How long have you been in Montana?" she asked. "About 5 years. Came up from Texas after the war ended, though I was too young to fight in it. Worked my way north through Kansas and Wyoming, learning the cattle business. The 3-bar hired me on 3 years ago, and it's been good work." He settled back into his chair. "Hard but good. I like it out here. Big sky, clean air, room to breathe. Do you ever get lonely?" Fletcher considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. Most of the ranch hands are good fellows, and we have a bunkhouse where we play cards and tell lies on winter nights. But yeah, sometimes I think it would be nice to have something more, someone to share it with, maybe." He looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "What about you? You got someone waiting for you somewhere?" "No," Molly said. "I was engaged once back in Missouri." But he decided he wanted a woman who would be content to sit at home and embroider pillowcases, not one who wanted to teach and have her own money. "So I broke it off." "His loss," Fletcher said simply. They talked through the afternoon as the storm raged outside. Molly learned that Fletcher had been born in a small town in Texas, that his parents had died of fever when he was 16, that he had a younger sister married to a farmer in Colorado. He loved horses, could play the fiddle passably well, and had a deep mistrust of politicians and snake oil salesmen. He was good with a rope and better with a rifle, but he had only killed 2 men in his life, both in clear self-defense, and he did not like to talk about it. Molly told him about growing up in St. Louis, about her father who had been a schoolteacher himself until consumption took him, about her mother who had remarried a man Molly could not stand, and why she had jumped at the chance to come west and stay with her sister. She loved reading, especially poetry, and she believed that education was the key to making a better world. She had never been west of Kansas City before this trip, and she had been both terrified and exhilarated by the vast emptiness of the plains. As evening fell, Fletcher cooked a simple meal of beans and hardtack, apologizing for the poor fare. Molly ate gratefully, feeling strength return to her body with each bite. Her fingers and toes still hurt, but it was the pain of healing, not damage. She would not lose anything to frostbite, Fletcher assured her. She had been lucky, though luck seemed too small a word for what had happened. Miraculous, maybe. Divine intervention. Or maybe just Fletcher Zimmerman being in the right place at the right time. Night brought new challenges. The line shack had only 1 bunk, and Fletcher insisted Molly take it while he made a bed on the floor near the fire. She protested, saying he had already saved her life and given her his coat, and should not have to sleep on the cold ground, but he was immovable on the subject. "I'll spend my life keeping you warm if that's what it takes," he said, and though he said it lightly, there was something underneath the words that made Molly's heart skip. "But tonight, I'll settle for making sure you don't freeze while I'm sleeping. Now close your eyes and rest. Tomorrow will be another long day." Molly lay under the blankets, listening to the storm and the crackle of the fire and Fletcher's steady breathing from the floor. She should have been frightened, alone with a strange man in the middle of nowhere. But she was not frightened at all. Instead, she felt safer than she had in a very long time, as if Fletcher's presence was itself a shield against all the dangers of the world. She fell asleep thinking about gray eyes and strong hands, and the way he had said, "I'll spend my life keeping you warm," as if he meant every word. The storm blew itself out during the night, and Molly woke to brilliant sunshine streaming through the frosted window. The world outside was a dazzling white, with snow drifted high against the shack's walls and hanging heavy on the pine branches. It was beautiful and treacherous, deadly cold hidden beneath beauty. Fletcher was already up, feeding the fire and melting snow for water. He smiled when he saw her awake, and Molly felt something flip over in her chest. "Morning," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she said, sitting up. And it was true. The bone-deep cold was gone, replaced by a pleasant warmth. Her fingers and toes were sore but working. She was alive, and that was everything. "What about you? Did you sleep at all?" "Enough. I'm used to rough sleeping." He poured hot water into a cup with some crushed herbs. "This is mint tea, or as close as I can make it. Should help warm you from the inside." Molly accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her still tender hands around it. "What happens now?" "Now I need to ride out and look for that stage, see if there's anything to be done for the driver. And I should check the cattle, make sure none of them drifted into trouble during the storm." He hesitated. "I hate to leave you alone, but there's no help for it. I can't take you with me in the cold, not after what you've been through." "I'll be fine," Molly assured him, though the thought of being alone in the shack made her nervous. "Just tell me what to do if something happens." Fletcher spent the next hour giving her instructions. How to feed the fire, how to ration the food, where he kept the rifle, and how to load it if she needed to. He made her repeat everything back to him until he was satisfied she understood. Then he bundled into his coat and headed out into the snow, promising to be back before dark. The hours alone passed slowly. Molly kept the fire going, melted snow for water, and tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong. What if Fletcher got lost in the snow? What if he was injured? What if he never came back and she was stranded here alone? She pushed the thoughts away and focused on practical things. She tidied the shack as best she could, organized the supplies, even attempted to darn a hole in one of the blankets using a needle and thread she found in a tin box. Late afternoon brought the sound of hoofbeats, and Molly rushed to the window to see Fletcher riding up through the snow, his horse steaming in the cold. Relief flooded through her, so strong it left her shaking. He was back. He was safe. Fletcher came in stamping snow from his boots, his face grim. "Found the stage. You were right about the driver, nothing I could do for him. I marked the spot so they can recover the body when the weather's better. Found your carpet bag, though." He held it up, crusted with snow. "Everything inside is pretty wet, but it should dry out." "Thank you," Molly said, taking the bag. The clothes inside were soaked through, but at least she had them. "What about the cattle?" "Lost a couple head that got separated and froze. The rest are all right." He hung up his coat and moved to the fire, holding his hands to the warmth. "I've been thinking. The roads won't be clear enough for travel for at least another day, maybe two. But once they are, I'll take you to Hamilton myself. Make sure you get there safe. You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to, I want to." He looked at her, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. "I found you half dead in the snow, Molly. I'm not letting you out of my sight until I know you're safe with your sister. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "I want to meet the woman you crossed half the country to see." That night they ate better, as Fletcher had brought back some supplies from the main ranch that he had stashed in one of the other line shacks. There was real coffee, dried apples, even a bit of bacon. They cooked together in the tiny space, their hands brushing as they worked, and Molly found herself hyper-aware of his presence, of the way he moved, of the sound of his voice. After dinner, as they sat by the fire, Fletcher pulled a harmonica from his pocket and played soft, melancholy tunes that reminded Molly of loneliness and longing and wide open spaces. She watched his fingers move on the instrument, watched his eyes close as he lost himself in the music, and felt something shift inside her. This was not just gratitude, she realized. This was not just relief at being alive. This was something deeper, something dangerous and wonderful and terrifying all at once. When he finished playing, she said, "That was beautiful." "My pa taught me," Fletcher said, turning the harmonica over in his hands, "before he died. It's one of the few things I have left from him." "Tell me about him." So Fletcher talked about his father, a gentle man who had loved books and music and had never quite fit into the rough world of Texas frontier life. He talked about his mother, strong and practical, who had held their small family together through drought and hardship. He talked about losing them both within a week of each other, of the hollow grief that had nearly swallowed him whole, of how he had survived by moving, by working, by refusing to let himself feel too much. "But you can't live like that forever," he said quietly. "Sooner or later you have to let yourself feel again, let yourself care about something, someone." "Is that what you're doing now?" Molly asked. "Letting yourself feel?" Fletcher looked at her, and in the firelight his eyes were dark and deep as wells. "Maybe I am. I know we just met, Molly. I know this is crazy. But when I saw you lying in the snow, something in me just knew I couldn't let you die. And now that I've talked to you, gotten to know you even just a little, I don't think I can let you go." Molly's heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "Fletcher, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Not yet. I'm not asking for promises or declarations. I just want you to know that what I said last night, I meant it. I'll spend my life keeping you warm if you'll let me. I'll spend it making sure you're safe and happy and have everything you need." He reached out and took her hand, his rough fingers gentle around hers. "I know I'm just a cowboy. I don't have much to offer, but I'm a hard worker and I'm honest and I'd treat you right. I'd spend every day trying to be worthy of you." Tears burned in Molly's eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "Fletcher, you saved my life. You're sitting here telling me you're not worthy when you're the best man I've ever met. Does that mean you might consider it? Consider us?" Molly squeezed his hand. "I think I'd like that very much." Fletcher's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so sweet and old-fashioned it made her heart ache. "Then we'll take it slow," he said. "We'll get you to Hamilton, get you settled with your sister. I'll court you proper, the way a woman like you deserves, and we'll see where it leads." They sat by the fire, holding hands, and talked until the logs burned down to embers. Molly learned about Fletcher's dreams, how he wanted to have his own ranch someday, a place where he could raise good horses and cattle and build something lasting. Fletcher learned about Molly's passion for teaching, her belief that every child deserved a chance at education, her dream of eventually opening a school of her own. Their dreams should have been incompatible. She was a teacher who loved learning. He was a cowboy who had never finished formal schooling. She had come from the city. He had spent his whole life on the frontier. But somehow, sitting in that tiny lined shack with the Montana winter howling outside, their dreams did not seem incompatible at all. They seemed to fit together like pieces of a puzzle, each one completing the other. The next day dawned clear and cold. Fletcher declared the roads passable enough for travel, though it would be slow going. He fashioned a makeshift saddle arrangement, so Molly could ride the pack mule while he rode his horse, and they set out mid-morning, heading east toward Hamilton. The journey took most of the day, picking their way carefully through snowdrifts and frozen streams. Fletcher was a patient, attentive guide, stopping frequently to make sure Molly was warm enough, not too tired, not saddle sore. They passed 2 ranches where Fletcher was known, and at each one he made sure to tell the owners about the stage crash and the dead driver so word could be sent to the proper authorities. Late afternoon found them riding into Hamilton, a small town of perhaps 200 souls nestled in a valley between snow-covered mountains. The main street was lined with false-fronted buildings, including a general store, a hotel, a saloon, a church, and the small schoolhouse where Molly would be teaching. People turned to stare as they rode past, probably curious about the strange woman on the mule and the cowboy escorting her. Fletcher pulled up in front of the general store, a sturdy building with Kershaw's Mercantile painted on a sign above the door. Before Molly could dismount, the door flew open and a woman came running out, her skirts held up out of the snow. Molly. Oh my God, Molly. Ellen Kershaw was 5 years older than her sister, with the same dark hair and blue eyes. She reached up and practically pulled Molly off the mule, folding her into a fierce embrace. We heard about the stage crash. They said everyone was dead. I thought you were gone. I thought I'd lost you. I'm fine, Ellen. I'm fine. Molly hugged her sister back, feeling tears stream down both their faces. This is Fletcher Zimmerman. He saved my life. Ellen turned to Fletcher, who had dismounted and stood holding the reins of both animals. Her expression was a mixture of gratitude and assessment, the look of an older sister determining if a man was good enough for her younger sibling. Mr. Zimmerman, she said, I don't know how to thank you. No thanks necessary, madam. I'm just glad I found her in time. Fletcher shifted his weight, suddenly awkward. I should be going. I need to get back to the ranch before full dark. Absolutely not, Ellen said firmly. You'll stay for dinner at least. It's the least we can do, and you'll stay the night. My husband will insist. We have a room above the store. Fletcher glanced at Molly, who nodded encouragingly. Please stay, she said softly. I'd like you to. So Fletcher stayed, and Molly watched as her sister and brother-in-law fussed over him, plying him with hot food and good coffee and endless questions about the rescue. Robert Kershaw was a solid, practical man who clearly adored his wife, and he shook Fletcher's hand with genuine warmth. You've given us back something precious, Robert said. Ellen's been beside herself since we heard about the crash. If there's ever anything we can do for you, anything at all, you just name it. After dinner, while Ellen was showing Molly the small house behind the store where she would be living, Fletcher and Robert talked business. Robert knew the owner of the 3-bar ranch and promised to send word that Fletcher would be delayed returning. He also offered Fletcher a standing line of credit at the store, which Fletcher accepted with quiet dignity. When Molly came back downstairs, she found Fletcher waiting by the door, his coat on and his hat in his hands. I should go, he said. Let you rest and visit with your sister. Will I see you again? The words came out more desperate than Molly had intended, but she could not help it. The thought of him leaving, of not knowing when he would return, was suddenly unbearable. I'll be back in 3 days, Fletcher promised. Sunday. If that's all right with you, I'd like to come calling. Take you to church, maybe walk with you afterward. I'd like that very much. Fletcher smiled, and Molly thought again how handsome he was, how good and kind and brave. On impulse, she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, feeling the scratch of his beard stubble against her lips. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Fletcher's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she had not realized she had shed. I'll spend my life keeping you warm, Molly Kane, he said softly. That's a promise. Then he was gone, riding out into the twilight, and Molly stood at the window watching until he disappeared from sight. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Ellen took Molly to meet the school board, a group of local ranchers and businessmen who were pleased she had survived to take the teaching position. They showed her the schoolhouse, a one-room building with a wood stove, rough desks, and a small library of battered books. It was nothing like the well-appointed schools back east, but Molly loved it immediately. This was hers, her chance to make a difference. Ellen also insisted on taking Molly to the dressmaker to order new clothes to replace what had been ruined in the crash. The dressmaker, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Patterson, studied Molly with interest. "So you're the teacher everyone's talking about," she said. "And the woman Fletcher Zimmerman pulled out of the snow." "News travels fast," Molly said. "In a town this size, news travels at the speed of thought." Mrs. Patterson measured Molly's waist with quick, efficient movements. "Fletcher's a good man, keeps to himself mostly but always polite, works hard. The kind of man a woman could build a life with." Molly felt herself blushing. "We've only just met." "Sometimes that's all it takes." "My husband proposed after knowing me for 2 weeks. We've been married 23 years. Mrs. Patterson smiled. "I'm just saying, if Fletcher Zimmerman is courting you, you could do a lot worse." Sunday came at last, bright and cold. Molly dressed carefully in one of her salvage dresses, a deep blue wool that brought out her eyes. Ellen helped her pin up her hair and loaned her a warm shawl. When Fletcher arrived at the store, prompt at 9 o'clock, Molly's heart leaped at the sight of him. He had cleaned up for the occasion, wearing pressed black pants, a white shirt, and a string tie. His hair was neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved. He looked handsome and nervous and so sincere it made Molly want to cry. "You look beautiful," he said, and the simple honesty in his voice was worth more than any flowery compliment. "You look very handsome yourself." They walked to church together, Molly's hand resting in the crook of Fletcher's arm. The whole town seemed to be watching them, but Molly found she did not care. Let them look. Let them talk. She had found something precious in that blizzard, something worth more than gold or propriety or what anyone else thought. The service was held in a small white church with a bell tower and plain wooden pews. The minister, a young man named Reverend Thompson, preached about providence and divine intervention, about how God worked in mysterious ways to bring people together. Molly felt Fletcher's hand find hers during the sermon, their fingers intertwining, and she thought that if this was divine intervention, she was profoundly grateful. After church, they walked together through the snowy streets, talking about everything and nothing. Fletcher told her about his week, about the cattle and the other ranch hands. Molly told him about preparing for her first day of school, about the students she would be teaching, about her nervousness and excitement. "You'll be wonderful," Fletcher said with absolute confidence. "Those kids are lucky to have you." They had dinner with Ellen and Robert, and afterward, Fletcher and Molly sat in the parlor while Ellen played the piano. It was all very proper and chaperoned, but when Fletcher took Molly's hand, when their eyes met across the room, there was nothing proper about the feelings racing through her. Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. Fletcher would ride into town every Sunday without fail, and he and Molly would spend the day together. They attended church, took long walks, shared meals with Ellen and Robert. On weekdays, Molly threw herself into teaching, discovering that she loved it even more than she had imagined. Her students ranged from 6 to 14, the children of ranchers and storekeepers and miners. They were rough around the edges but eager to learn, and Molly found joy in watching their faces light up when they grasped a new concept. Fletcher courted her with old-fashioned deliberation. He brought her small gifts, a pretty stone he had found by a creek, wildflowers preserved and pressed between pages of an old book, a comb carved from elk antler. He wrote her letters during the week, his handwriting rough but his words sweet and sincere. He told her about his days, his thoughts, his growing feelings for her. Molly wrote back, long letters about her students and her life in Hamilton and how much she looked forward to Sundays. She told him things she had never told anyone, about her fears and dreams, about what she wanted from life. And Fletcher listened, really listened, in a way no one ever had before. Spring came slowly to Montana, the snow melting in fits and starts, revealing brown grass and muddy roads. On a Sunday in late March, Fletcher took Molly on a picnic to a spot by a rushing creek swollen with snowmelt. They sat on a blanket he had brought, eating fried chicken and biscuits Ellen had packed for them, and watched the water tumble over smooth stones. "I've been thinking," Fletcher said after a while, "about the future, about what I want." Molly's heart began to pound. "And what do you want?" "I want my own place. I've been saving money for years, and I think I have enough now to make a down payment on some land. There's a property about 10 miles from here, good grazing, water rights, a decent house that needs some work. I talked to the owner last week and he's willing to sell." "Fletcher, that's wonderful." "It would be wonderful," Fletcher said carefully, "if I had someone to share it with. Someone who could turn a house into a home. Someone who could maybe teach school part of the year and help me build something lasting the rest of the time." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Molly, I know we've only known each other a few months. I know it's fast, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I think I've loved you since I pulled you out of that snow and you opened your eyes and looked at me like I was a miracle. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend my life keeping you warm?" Tears streamed down Molly's face, but she was smiling, smiling so wide it hurt. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Fletcher, I'll marry you. I love you too. I've been trying not to say it, trying to be sensible and cautious, but I can't help it. I love you so much it scares me." Fletcher whooped with joy and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around until they both fell laughing onto the blanket. Then he was kissing her, really kissing her for the first time, and it was everything Molly had dreamed of and more. His lips were warm and sure, his arms strong around her, and she felt like she was finally home after a lifetime of wandering. They were married 6 weeks later in the little white church, with the whole town in attendance. Ellen cried through the entire ceremony, and Robert had to lend her 3 handkerchiefs. Molly wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Patterson had sewn with loving care, and she carried wildflowers Fletcher had picked that morning. Fletcher wore a new suit that made him look almost unbearably handsome, and when he said his vows, his voice was steady and sure. "I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and keep you warm for all the days of my life," he said. And everyone laughed because by now the whole town knew the story of how they had met. "And I promise to love you, honor you, stand beside you, and warm your life in return," Molly said, her voice thick with tears. They honeymooned at the new ranch, which Fletcher had been working on in secret with help from some of the other cowboys. The house was small but solid, with a bedroom, a kitchen, and a parlor with a stone fireplace. Fletcher had built bookshelves for Molly's books and a desk where she could prepare her lessons. He had planted a garden and fixed up the barn and corrals. It was not fancy, but it was theirs, and Molly loved every inch of it. Their first night as husband and wife, Fletcher carried Molly over the threshold and set her down gently in the parlor. He had lit a fire and the room glowed with warm light. "Welcome home, Mrs. Zimmerman," he said, and the name made Molly's heart swell with happiness. "Take me to bed, Mr. Zimmerman," she said, and watched his eyes darken with desire. What followed was tender and passionate, awkward in the way of first times but sweet beyond measure. Fletcher was gentle with her, making sure she was comfortable, that she wanted this as much as he did. Molly had been nervous, but with Fletcher, the nervousness melted away, replaced by love and trust and a desire that surprised her with its intensity. Afterward they lay tangled together under the quilts, Molly's head on Fletcher's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Are you warm enough?" he murmured against her hair. Molly laughed softly. "I'm perfect. You've kept your promise, Fletcher Zimmerman. I've never been warmer in my life." The first year of their marriage was hard work, but filled with joy. Molly continued teaching, riding the 10 miles to Hamilton 3 days a week on a gentle mare Fletcher had given her as a wedding present. The other days, she helped Fletcher build up the ranch, which they named the Crooked Creek after the stream that ran through their property. They started with 20 head of cattle and a few horses. Fletcher worked dawn to dusk, mending fences, branding calves, breaking horses to saddle. Molly kept the house, tended the garden, and helped with the endless chores that came with ranch life. It was exhausting, but at night, they would collapse into bed together, and Fletcher would hold her close and tell her he loved her, and Molly would think that she had never been happier. Their first winter together was harsh, with snow that lasted from November to April. But the house was tight and warm, and they had plenty of supplies laid in. On the longest, coldest nights, they would sit by the fire, Fletcher playing his harmonica while Molly read aloud from her favorite books. Sometimes they would just talk, planning their future, dreaming about what they would build together. "I want children," Molly said one night in January as the wind howled outside. "At least 3 or 4. 4? Fletcher raised his eyebrows. "You sure about that?" "I grew up with just Ellen, and I always wished for more brothers and sisters. I want our children to have that, to have a whole house full of people who love them." Fletcher pulled her closer, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Then we'll have 4 or 5. Or however many God sees fit to give us, and we'll love them all, and they'll grow up knowing they're wanted and cherished." "Tell me what you hope for them," Molly said softly. "I hope they're as smart as their mother," Fletcher said, "and as brave. I hope they grow up knowing how to work hard but also how to dream. I hope they find love like we found each other, something strong enough to weather any storm." Molly turned in his arms to kiss him, tasting the coffee they had shared earlier, feeling the scratch of his beard on her face. "They will," she promised, "because they'll have us to show them how." Spring brought twin blessings. The first was the birth of their first child, a son they named William Fletcher Zimmerman after Fletcher's father. He was born in the bedroom of the ranch house on a warm May morning, with Ellen serving as midwife and Fletcher pacing anxiously in the parlor, until Ellen called him in to meet his son. Fletcher took the tiny, red-faced baby in his work-roughened hands with infinite care, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "He's perfect," he whispered. "You're perfect. Thank you, Molly. Thank you for giving me this." The second blessing was the arrival of 20 more head of cattle, purchased with money they had saved and a small loan from the bank. The Crooked Creek was growing, slowly but surely, into a viable ranch. They hired their first hand, a young cowboy named Pete who had worked with Fletcher at the 3 Bar. With his help, Fletcher was able to expand their operations, taking on more cattle and starting to breed horses. Molly took a year off from teaching to care for William, and she found she loved motherhood as much as she had hoped she would. Her son was bright and curious, with Fletcher's gray eyes and her dark hair. He was a happy baby, content to sit in a basket while she worked around the house or ride in a sling on her back while she tended the garden. When William was a year old, Molly returned to teaching part-time, and Ellen came to the ranch twice a week to watch the baby. The arrangement worked well, and Molly found she was happiest when she could balance her love of teaching with her love for her family and the ranch. 2 years later, their daughter was born, a tiny, fierce thing they named Grace Ellen after both her grandmothers. Grace had Molly's blue eyes and Fletcher's stubborn determination. Even as an infant, she knew what she wanted and was not afraid to demand it. William adored his baby sister, and Molly's heart swelled watching her children play together. The ranch continued to prosper. By their 5th anniversary, the Crooked Creek was one of the most successful small ranches in the area. Fletcher had a reputation for fair dealing and good horses, and their cattle brought top prices at market. They had built a new barn, expanded the house to add 2 more bedrooms and hired 2 more hands, but success brought its own challenges. Rustlers hit them one night, making off with 10 head of cattle. Fletcher and the other ranchers formed a posse and tracked them down, recovering most of the stolen stock. Fletcher came home exhausted and troubled, and Molly held him while he talked about the violence he had witnessed, the men who had been shot, the waste of it all. "I hate it," he said. "I hate that we have to live like this, always watching, always ready to fight. I wanted to build something peaceful here, something good." "And you have," Molly assured him. "This ranch, our family, our life together, that's all good. That's all worth protecting. Those rustlers made their choice. You made yours, and your choice was to build instead of steal, to create instead of destroy. I'm so proud of you, Fletcher." He kissed her forehead. "I couldn't do any of this without you. You're my strength, Molly, my warmth, my everything." Their third child arrived 2 years after Grace, another son they named Thomas Robert after Molly's father and her brother-in-law. Thomas was a quiet, thoughtful baby, content to watch the world with solemn eyes. He seemed to have inherited Molly's love of learning, fascinated by books and pictures even as a tiny infant. Molly was 30 years old now, and Fletcher was 34. They had been married for 7 years, and Molly could honestly say they had been the happiest years of her life. Yes, there had been hardships. The winter when they nearly lost half their herd to disease, the summer when drought dried up the creek and they had to drive the cattle to higher pastures, the constant work and worry that came with ranch life. But through it all, they had each other. They had built something real and lasting, a love that had started in a blizzard and grown into something strong enough to weather any storm. On their 7th anniversary, Fletcher took Molly back to the line shack where he had first brought her. It was still there, maintained by the 3 bar as part of their winter operations. They rode out on a warm June day, bringing a picnic and leaving the children with Ellen for the afternoon. Inside, the shack looked exactly as Molly remembered it, the small fireplace, the narrow bunk, the rough shelves. But instead of being a place of desperation and cold, it now seemed cozy and intimate, filled with memories of how their love had begun. "You ever think about that night?" Fletcher asked, building a fire in the fireplace even though it was not cold. "About how close we came to never meeting." "All the time," Molly admitted. "If the stage hadn't crashed exactly where it did, if you hadn't been checking the line shacks that day, if you had gone a different direction. So many things had to go exactly right for us to find each other." "I don't believe in coincidence," Fletcher said. "I think we were meant to find each other, Molly. I think everything in our lives led us to that moment in the snow." Molly moved into his arms, resting her head against his chest. "Do you remember what you said to me? When you first brought me here, I said I'd spend my life keeping you warm." "And you have," Molly whispered. "Every single day in 1,000 different ways, not just with fire and blankets, but with your love, your kindness, your strength. You've kept my heart warm, Fletcher. You've made my whole life warm." Fletcher tilted her face up to kiss her, slow and deep. "And you've done the same for me. Before I found you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You gave me a reason to really live, to dream, to build something that matters. You gave me a family, a home, a future. You gave me everything." They made love there in the line shack, on blankets Fletcher had brought, with the fire crackling and the afternoon sun streaming through the window. It was different from their first awkward night together, shaped by 7 years of knowing each other's bodies, understanding each other's needs. It was passionate and tender, a celebration of all they had survived and built together. Afterward, lying tangled together, Molly said, "I want one more baby, maybe 2. Fletcher laughed, a sound of pure joy. "You're determined to fill that house, aren't you?" I want our children to have what I dreamed of, a house full of love and laughter. And I want to give you as many children as we can to make sure our legacy lives on. Then we'll have more babies, Fletcher agreed. As many as you want, though I'm not sure how much more the house can hold. We'll build on, Molly said practically. Add another wing. You're good with your hands, Mr. Zimmerman. I'm sure you can figure it out. Their fourth child, a daughter named Rose Margaret, arrived the following spring. She was a tiny, delicate baby, smaller than the others had been, and for a few frightening days they were not sure she would survive. But Rose was a fighter, and with Molly's careful nursing and Fletcher's constant prayers, she pulled through and grew into a bright, happy little girl. By the time Rose was walking, Molly was pregnant again with their fifth and final child. This pregnancy was harder than the others, and she was sick for the first few months, exhausted all the time. Fletcher hired a woman from town to help with the house and the children, and he fussed over Molly constantly, making sure she rested and ate properly. "I'm fine," Molly kept telling him. "Women have babies all the time." "Not my wife," Fletcher said stubbornly. "Not without me making sure she's taken care of." Their last baby was born on a snowy December night, almost exactly 10 years after Fletcher had found Molly freezing in the blizzard. It seemed fitting, somehow, that their family would be completed in the season when it had begun. The baby was another son, healthy and strong, with a lusty cry that echoed through the house. They named him Benjamin Charles, and with his arrival, their family felt complete. 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls, all healthy and loved and wanted. The house rang with noise and laughter and the constant chaos of a large family, and Molly had never been happier. As the children grew, Fletcher taught them to ride and rope and care for the horses and cattle. Molly taught them to read and write and think critically about the world. Together, they taught them about hard work and honesty, about standing up for what was right and treating others with kindness and respect. William grew into a tall, serious young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Grace was fierce and independent, determined to do everything her brothers could do. Thomas was the scholar, always with his nose in a book, dreaming of going to university someday. Rose was the peacemaker, sweet and gentle, with a gift for soothing hurt feelings and mediating disputes. And Benjamin was the wild one, always getting into mischief, keeping everyone on their toes. The ranch continued to thrive. By their 15th anniversary, the Crooked Creek was one of the largest and most successful ranches in the territory. They ran 200 head of cattle, bred sought-after horses, and employed 6 full-time hands. Fletcher had built a larger barn, a bunkhouse for the workers, and had expanded the main house twice more to accommodate their growing family. Molly had eventually stopped teaching to focus on the ranch and the children, but she never stopped being an educator. She tutored all their children herself, and she often opened her home to other ranch children whose families could not afford to send them to school in Hamilton. Her impromptu schoolroom in the parlor became known throughout the county, and parents would ride for miles to ask if she would take on their children. Montana became a state in 1889, and the Zimmermans celebrated with a party at the ranch, inviting all their neighbors and friends. Ellen and Robert came, older now but still happy together. Pete, who had worked for them from the beginning, was now the ranch foreman with a wife and children of his own. The ranch hands came, and the neighboring ranchers, and what seemed like half of Hamilton. As Molly looked around at the crowd gathered in their barn, at the children running and playing, at Fletcher standing with a group of men discussing cattle prices, she felt overwhelming gratitude. They had built this, she and Fletcher, starting from nothing but love and determination. They had created not just a ranch but a community, a family, a legacy that would last for generations. That night, after everyone had gone home and the children were in bed, Molly and Fletcher sat on the porch of their house, watching the stars come out over the mountains. "Happy?" Fletcher asked, taking her hand. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," Molly said. "When I got on that stage in St. Louis all those years ago, I thought I was just coming west to teach. I had no idea I was coming home." "I think about that day all the time," Fletcher admitted. "What if I had checked the line shacks a day earlier or later? What if I had taken a different route? I would have missed you and my whole life would have been different." "But you didn't miss me," Molly said. "You found me and you saved me and you kept your promise. You've spent your life keeping me warm." "And I'll keep on doing it," Fletcher said, pulling her close, "for as long as we both shall live." They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the soft lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the pines, the distant howl of a coyote. This was their life, built through years of hard work and sustained by love. This was their legacy. Over the next decade, they watched their children grow into adults. William took over more and more of the ranch operations, working side by side with Fletcher to expand and improve the Crooked Creek. At 22, he married a rancher's daughter named Sarah, and they built a house on the far end of the property. A year later, they gave Molly and Fletcher their first grandchild, a boy they named Fletcher William after both his grandfathers. The first time Molly held her grandson, she wept. Fletcher stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, and she could see tears in his eyes too. "We did good," he said quietly. "Look at what we built, Molly. Look at what came from that day in the snow." Grace surprised everyone by announcing at 19 that she wanted to go to college to study veterinary medicine. It was almost unheard of for a woman, but Fletcher and Molly supported her dream wholeheartedly. They scraped together the money to send her to school in Colorado, and Grace wrote them long letters about her studies, about the challenges she faced as one of the few women in her program, about her determination to succeed. Thomas went to university as well, studying literature and history. He became a teacher, fulfilling the dream Molly had first brought west all those years ago. He took a position at a school in Helena and married a fellow teacher, a bright, fierce woman named Clara who reminded everyone of Grace. Rose married at 20, a young rancher who had been courting her for years. They settled on a property neighboring the Crooked Creek, and Rose continued to be the family peacemaker, hosting dinners and gatherings that brought everyone together. Benjamin, the youngest, was the last to leave home. He spent several years working different ranches throughout Montana and Wyoming, learning everything he could about cattle and horses. At 24, he returned to the Crooked Creek and built a house near Williams, ready to finally settle down. A year later, he married a girl from Hamilton, and Molly gained another daughter-in-law to love. By their 30th anniversary, Molly and Fletcher were 52 and 56 years old, respectively. Their hair was streaked with gray, their faces lined from years of sun and wind and hard work. But they were healthy and happy, surrounded by their children and growing brood of grandchildren. They celebrated the anniversary with another party at the ranch, even bigger than the statehood celebration. All 5 children came with their families. Ellen and Robert, now in their 70s but still spry, made the trip from Hamilton. Friends and neighbors from all over the territory attended. During the party, Fletcher stood up to make a speech. The crowd quieted, and Molly watched her husband, still handsome to her despite the gray in his hair and the lines on his face. 30 years ago, Fletcher began, I found a woman freezing to death in a blizzard. I brought her to a line shack and made her a promise. I told her I'd spend my life keeping her warm. He looked at Molly, his eyes bright with emotion. "I've done my best to keep that promise every single day since, but what I didn't know then was that she would do the same for me. Molly has kept me warm in ways I never imagined, with her love, her strength, her wisdom. She gave me children and grandchildren. She helped me build this ranch into something we can be proud of. She made my life worth living." Molly was crying openly now, and she was not the only one. Half the guests were wiping their eyes. Fletcher held out his hand to her. "Molly Kane Zimmerman, will you spend the next 30 years keeping me warm?" Molly stood and went to him, taking his hand. "I'll spend the rest of my life keeping you warm, Fletcher Zimmerman. That's a promise." They kissed to thunderous applause, and the party continued long into the night. But Molly would always remember that moment, standing with Fletcher's arms around her, surrounded by the life they had built together, and feeling more grateful than she had ever felt in her life. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. Ellen died at 76, and Molly grieved for the sister who had been her anchor for so many years. But Ellen's death was peaceful in her sleep, and Robert assured Molly that her sister had been happy to the very end. Fletcher's health began to decline in his mid-60s. The years of hard ranch work had taken their toll on his body, and his joints ached in cold weather. He developed a cough that would not go away, and the doctor warned that his lungs had been damaged by years of breathing cold Montana air. But Fletcher refused to slow down, still working alongside William every day, still riding out to check on the cattle. "I'm not ready to be put out to pasture," he told Molly stubbornly when she suggested he take it easier. "I'm not asking you to stop working," Molly said. "I'm asking you to take care of yourself. I need you, Fletcher. Our grandchildren need you. Please don't push yourself so hard." So Fletcher agreed to work shorter days, to let William and Benjamin handle more of the heavy labor. He spent more time with Molly, taking long, slow rides around the property, sitting on the porch in the evenings, playing with his grandchildren. They had 14 grandchildren by then, ranging in age from infants to teenagers, and Fletcher delighted in all of them. On a spring morning in 1912, when Fletcher was 70 and Molly was 66, they rode out together to the line shack. It was still there, maintained now by the Zimmerman family as part of the Crooked Creek. They had not visited in years, but something had drawn Molly to suggest the trip, and Fletcher had agreed immediately. Inside, the shack looked much as it always had, though the Zimmermans had improved it over the years, adding a better stove and more supplies. But the bunk was the same, and the stone fireplace, and Molly could almost see their younger selves huddled by the fire, falling in love. 30 years since we've been here together," Fletcher said, building a fire more out of nostalgia than need. "Remember how scared you were?" "I remember how safe I felt once you were there," Molly corrected. "I remember thinking that if I was going to die, at least I wouldn't die alone. You didn't die. You lived. We both lived." Fletcher sat on the bunk and patted the space beside him. Molly sat and he put his arm around her. "I have no regrets, Molly, not a single one. My life has been exactly what I wanted it to be." "Mine too," Molly said, "though I do wish we could have more time. We'll have whatever time we're given and we'll be grateful for it." Fletcher kissed the top of her head. "But I want you to promise me something, anything. When I'm gone, don't you dare stop living. Keep the ranch going. Spoil the grandchildren, maybe even do some teaching again if you want. Be happy, Molly. That's all I've ever wanted for you." "Fletcher Zimmerman, don't you talk like that. You're going to be around for years yet." But they both knew it was not entirely true. Fletcher's health continued to decline over the next 2 years. The cough worsened, and he grew thin and frail. But his spirit remained strong, and his love for Molly and their family never wavered. On a cold December night in 1913, 31 years and a few weeks after he had found Molly in the blizzard, Fletcher Zimmerman died peacefully in his sleep with Molly holding his hand. He was 71 years old. The funeral was the largest Hamilton had ever seen. People came from all over Montana to pay their respects to the man who had built the Crooked Creek, who had raised 5 fine children, who had been a pillar of the community. But Molly knew they also came to honor the love story that had become legendary in the territory. The tale of the cowboy who had found a woman freezing in the snow and promised to spend his life keeping her warm. In the months after Fletcher's death, Molly thought often about giving up, about letting grief swallow her whole. But she had made a promise to Fletcher, and she was determined to keep it. She stayed on at the ranch, helping William manage operations, spending time with her children and grandchildren, finding purpose in the legacy she and Fletcher had built together. Grace, now a successful veterinarian with her own practice, came to stay for a few weeks. One evening, as they sat on the porch where Molly and Fletcher had spent so many evenings, Grace said, "Tell me the story again, Mama, about how you and Papa met." So Molly told the story one more time, about the blizzard, and the stage crash, and the cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life. She told about the line shack, and the promise Fletcher had made, about falling in love and building a life together, about 33 years of marriage that had been far too short, and yet somehow exactly enough. "He kept his promise," Molly said, looking out at the mountains silhouetted against the sunset. "Every single day he kept me warm, and now it's my job to keep his memory warm, to make sure our grandchildren and great-grandchildren know about the love we shared." "They'll know," Grace promised. "We'll all make sure they know." Molly lived for another 12 years, dying peacefully at the age of 78 in the house Fletcher had built for her. In those years, she saw the ranch continue to thrive under William's management. She saw Grace become one of the most respected veterinarians in Montana. She saw Thomas publish a book of poetry. She saw Rose's children grow up and start families of their own. She saw Benjamin build the Crooked Creek into one of the largest ranches in the state. She also saw the birth of her first great-grandchild, a girl named Molly Grace after her and her daughter. When they placed the baby in her arms, Molly wept, thinking about Fletcher and how much he would have loved to see this, to see their legacy continuing into another generation. On the day Molly died, surrounded by her children and many of her grandchildren, her last words were about Fletcher. "I'm going to see him now," she said, her voice weak but content. "And I'm going to tell him thank you. Thank you for finding me in the snow. Thank you for keeping me warm. Thank you for a lifetime of love." They buried her next to Fletcher on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a stone that read Molly Kane Zimmerman, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She was loved and she was warm. Years later, the line shack was preserved as a historic site, with a plaque telling the story of Fletcher and Molly Zimmerman, the cowboy and the teacher who had met in a blizzard and built a love that lasted a lifetime. Tourists came from all over to see it, to stand in the small space where a great love story had begun, to remind themselves that true love was real and worth fighting for. The Crooked Creek Ranch continued through the generations, passing from William to his son to his grandson. Each generation added their own touches, but they always maintained the house that Fletcher had built, and the porch where he and Molly had spent so many evenings together. They kept the story alive, telling their children about the blizzard and the promise and the love that had built not just a ranch but a dynasty. On cold winter nights, when the snow fell thick and the wind howled around the buildings, the descendants of Fletcher and Molly Zimmerman would gather by the fire and tell the old story one more time. They would talk about courage and love, about promises kept and lives well lived. And they would remember that sometimes, in the darkest, coldest moments, love appears like a miracle, saving us not just from death but from a life half lived. Fletcher and Molly's story became more than just family history. It became a legend, a reminder that true love exists, that promises matter, that a single moment of kindness can change not just one life but generations of lives. It became a story about the power of love to warm even the coldest hearts, to light even the darkest nights, to endure beyond death itself. And in Hamilton, Montana, on winter evenings when the snow falls thick and families gather around their fires, grandparents still tell their grandchildren about the cowboy who found a woman freezing on the frontier and whispered, "I'll spend my life keeping you warm." They tell about how he kept that promise every day for 33 years, and how she kept it right back, and how the warmth of their love still echoes down through the generations, keeping their descendants warm more than a century later. It was a love story that began in ice and snow but burned bright enough to melt even the coldest winter. It was a promise that became a life that became a legacy, and a legacy that would live forever in the hearts of all who heard the tale. And that, more than anything, was the greatest warmth of all.